All right, here we go. What do we got? Chapter 60, Belus and the Danaids. King Belus, who ruled at Chemis in the Thebaid, was the son of Libya by Poseidon and twin brother of Agenor. His wife, Anchino, daughter of Nilus, bore him the twins Aegyptus and Danaus, and a third son, Cepheus. B. Aegyptus was given Arabia and as his kingdom, but also subdued the country of the Melampodes and named it Egypt after himself. 50 sons were born to him of various mothers, Libyans, Arabians, Phoenicians, and the like. Danaus, sent to rule Libya, had 50 daughters called the Danaids, also born of various mothers. Naiads, Hamadryads, Egyptian princesses of Elephantis and Memphis, Ethiopians, and the like. C. On Belusus's death, the twins quarreled over their inheritance, and as a conciliatory gesture, Aegyptius proposed a mass marriage between the 50 princes and the 50 princesses. Danaus, suspecting a plot, would not consent, and when an oracle confirmed his fears that Aegyptius had it in his mind to kill all the Danaids, prepared to flee from Libya. D. With Athene's assistance, he built a ship for himself and his daughters, the first two-prowed vessel that ever took the sea, and they sailed towards Greece together by way of Rhodes. There Danaus dedicated an image to Athene in a temple raised for her by the Danaids, 3 of whom died during their stay in the island. The cities of Lindus, Ialysus, and Camarius are called after them. E. From Rhodes, they sailed to the Peloponnese and landed near Lerna, where Danaus announced that he was divinely chosen to become king of Argos. Though the Argive king Galenor naturally laughed at his claim, his subjects assembled that evening to discuss it. Galenor would doubtless have kept the throne despite Danaus's declaration that Athene was supporting him, had not the Argives postponed their decision until dawn, when a wolf came boldly down from the hills, attacked a herd of cattle grazing near the city walls, and killed the leading bull. This they read as an omen that Danaus would take the throne by violence if he were opposed, and therefore persuaded Galenor to resign it peacefully. F. Danaus, convinced that the wolf had been Apollo in disguise, dedicated the famous shrine to wolfish Apollo at Argos, and became so powerful a ruler that all the Pelaglycians of Greece called themselves Danans. He also built the citadel of Argos, and his daughters brought the mysteries of Demeter, called Thessamorphia, from Egypt, and taught these to the Pelaglycian women. But since the Dorian invasion, the Thessamorphia are no longer performed in the Peloponnese except by the Arcadians. G. Danaus had found Argolis suffering from a prolonged drought, since Poseidon, vexed by Inachus's decision that the land was Hera's, had dried up all the rivers and streams. He sent his daughters in search of water, with orders to placate Poseidon by any means they knew. One of them, by the name of Amy Moani, while chasing a deer in the forest, happened to disturb a sleeping satyr. He sprang up and tried to ravish her, but Poseidon, whom she invoked, hurled his trident at the satyr. The fleeing satyr dodged the trident, struck the quivering in a rock, and Poseidon himself lay with Amymone, who was glad that she could carry out her father's instructions so pleasantly. On learning her errand, Poseidon pointed to his trident and told her to pull it from the rock. When she did, 3 streams of water jetted up from the 3 tine holes. The spring, now named Amymone, is the source of the river Lerna, which never fails even at the height of summer. H. At Amymone, the monstrous Hydra was born to Echidne under a plane tree. It lived in the nearby Lernaean lake, to which murderers come for purification. Hence the proverb, a Lerna of evils. I. Aegyptus now sent his sons to Argos, forbidding them to return until they had punished Danaus and his whole family. On their arrival, they begged Danaus to reverse his former decision to let them marry his daughters, intending, however, to murder them on the wedding night. When he still refused, they laid siege to Argos. Now there are no springs on the Argive citadel, and though the Danaids afterwards invented the art of sinking wells and supplied the city with several of these, including 4 sacred ones, it was waterless at the time in question. Seeing that thirst would soon force him to capitulate, Danaus promised to do what the sons of Aegyptus asked as soon as they raised the siege. J. A mass marriage was arranged and Danaus paired off the couples, his choice being made in some cases because the bride and bridegroom had mothers of equal rank or because their names were similar. Thus, Clyte, Snithnel, and Chrysippe married Cletus, Snithnellus, and Chrysippus. But in most cases, he drew lots from a helmet. K. During the wedding feast, Danaus secretly doled out sharp pins with his daughters, which his daughters were to conceal in their hair, and at midnight each stabbed her husband through the heart. There was only one survivor. On Artemis's advice, Hypermnestra saved the life of Lynceus because he had spared her maidenhead and helped him in his flight to the city of Lycia, 60 furlongs away. Hypermnestra begged him to light a beacon as a signal that he had reached safety, undertaking to answer it with another beacon from the citadel. And the Argives still light annual fire beacons in commemoration of this pact. At dawn, Danaus learned of Hypermnestra's disobedience, and she was tried for her life, but acquitted by the Argive judges. She therefore raised an image to victorious Aphrodite in the shrine of wolfish Apollo, and also dedicated a sanctuary to persuasive Artemis. Where was I? KJKL. L. The murdered men's heads were buried at Lerna and their bodies given full funeral honors below the walls of Argos. But although Athene and Hermes purified the Danaids in the Lernaean lake with Zeus's permission, the judges of the dead have condemned them to the endless task of carrying water in jars perforated like sieves. M. Lynceus and Hypermnestra were reunited, and Danaus, deciding to marry off the other daughters as fast as he could before noon on the day of their purification, called for suitors. He proposed a marriage race starting from the street now called Apheta, the winner to have first choice of a wife, and the others the next choices in their order of finishing the race. Since he could not find enough men who would risk their lives by marrying murderesses, only a few ran. But when the wedding night passed without disaster to the new bridegrooms, more suitors appeared, and another race was run on the following day. All descendants of these marriages ranked as Danaans, and the Argives still celebrate the race in their so-called Hymenaean contest. Lynceus later killed Danaus and reigned in his stead. He would willingly have killed his sister-in-law at the same time to avenge his murdered brothers had the Argives permitted this. N. Meanwhile, Aegyptus had come to Greece, but when he had learned of his son's fate, fled to Aro, where he died and was buried at Patrae in a sanctuary of Serapis. O. Amymoenes' son by Poseidon, Nuptialus, a famous navigator, discovered the art of steering by the Great Bear and founded the city of Neapolis, where he settled the Egyptian crew and had sailed with his grandfather. He was the ancestor of Neapolis, the wrecker, who used to lure hostile ships to their death by lighting false beacons. Excuse me. Footers. Wait, how long is this? All right, I'll do it. Footers 1. This myth records the early arrival in Greece of Hellenic colonists from Palestine by way of roads and their introduction of agriculture into the Peloponnese. It is claimed that they included immigrants from Libya and Ethiopia, which seems probable. Belus is the Baal of the Old Testament, not Ode, and the Bel of the Apocrypha. He had taken his name from the Sumerian moon goddess Belili, whom he ousted. 2. The three Danaids, also known as Telcanes or enchanters, who named the three chief cities of Rhodes, were the triple moon goddesses Danae. The names Linda, Chimeria, and Ialicia seem to be worn-down forms of Linodousia, binder with linen thread. Oh, Jesus. Katamari Zosa, sharer out, and Ialemestria, wailing woman. They are, in fact, the familiar three fates, or Morae, otherwise known as Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, because they exercise these very functions. The classical theory of the linen thread was that the goddess tied the human being to the end of a carefully measured thread, which she paid out yearly until the time came for her to cut it and thereby relinquish his soul to death. But originally she bound the wailing infant with a linen swaddling band on which his clan and family marks were embroidered and thus assigned him his destined place of society. 3. Danae's Sumerian name was Damkina. The Hebrews called her Dinah, also masculinized as Dan. 50 moon priestesses were the regular complement of a college, and their duty was to keep the land watered by rain-making charms, irrigation, and well-digging. Hence, the Danaid's name has been connected with the Greek word danos, parched, and with danos, a gift. The first A of which is sometimes long, sometimes short. The township of Agnar and Belus, like that of Danos and Aegyptus, points to a regal system at Argos in which each co-kings married a chief priestess and reigned for 50 lunar months, or half a great year. Chief priestesses were chosen by a foot race, the origin of the Olympic Games, run at the end of the 50 months or of 49 in alternate years, and the near-year foot race of Olympia, Sparta, Jerusalem, and Babylon was run for the sacred kingship as at Argos. A sun king must be swift. 4. The Hydra, destroyed by Hercules, seems to have personified this college of water providing priestesses, and the myth of the Danaids apparently records 2 Hellenic attempts to seize their sanctuary, the first of which failed signally. After the second successful attempt, the Hellenic leader married the chief priestess and distributed the water priestesses as wives among the chieftains. The street called Apheta will have been the starting point in the girls' race for the office of chief priestess, but also used in the man's foot race for the sacred kingship. Linnaeus, a royal title in Messene too, means of the lynx, the caracal, a sort of lion famous for its sharp sight. 5. Aegyptus and Danaus seem to have been early titles of Theban co-kings, and since it was a widespread custom to bury the sacred king's head at the approaches of a city, and thus protect it against invasion, I suppose heads of Aegyptus' son buried at Lerna were probably those of successive sacred kings. The Egyptians were called Melampodes, Blackfeet, because they paddled about in the Black Nile mud during the sowing season. 6. A later monogamous society represented the Danaids with their leaking water pots as undergoing eternal punishment for matricide. But in the icon from which this story derived, they were performing a necessary charm, sprinkling water on the ground to produce rain showers by sympathetic magic. It seems that the sieve or leaking pot remained a distinguishing mark of the wise woman many centuries after the abolition of the Danade colleges. Philostratus writes of women with sieves in their hands who go about pretending to heal cattle for simple cowherds. 7. Hypermnestra's and Lynceus's beacon fires will have been those lighted at the Argive Spring Festival to celebrate the triumph of the sun. It may be that the Argos, the sacred king, was put to death with a long needle thrust through his heart, a comparatively merciful end. 8. The Thesmorphia, dew offerings, were agricultural orgies celebrated at Athens, in the course of which the severed genitals of the sacred king or a surrogate were carried in a basket. These were replaced in more civilized times by phallus-shaped loaves and live serpents. Apollo Lysias may mean Apollo of the light rather than wolfish Apollo, but the two concepts were connected by the wolf's habit of howling at the full moon. All right.